What if I told you that the most advanced fighter jet in the world once sat grounded on a runway, its engines cold, while an entire Air Force base watched their best pilots walk away from what seemed like an impossible mission? What if I told you that when everyone else had given up, the person who saved the day was someone they'd spent months treating like she didn't belong there at all? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. This is the story of Lieutenant Commander Elena Vasquez, a woman who was never supposed to touch the controls of an F-35 Lightning II, a woman who was dismissed, overlooked, and pushed aside by every person who thought they knew what a fighter pilot should look like. But sometimes, the person everyone underestimates is exactly the person you need when everything falls apart. The Nevada desert stretched endlessly beyond the chain-link perimeter of Thunderbolt Air Base, a shimmering expanse of heat and silence that seemed to swallow sound itself. The morning sun cast long shadows across the tarmac where the crown jewel of American aviation sat in perfect formation, 6 F-35 Lightning II aircraft, their sleek surfaces reflecting the harsh light like polished obsidian. Each one represented the pinnacle of military engineering, a $30 billion program that had taken decades to perfect. Elena Vasquez stood at the passenger door of the transport bus, her single duffel bag slung over her shoulder, watching the base unfold before her through scratched glass windows. The other passengers, mostly maintenance crews and civilian contractors, filed out ahead of her, their conversations a low murmur of technical jargon and weekend plans. She waited until the bus was empty before stepping down onto the sun-baked asphalt. The heat hit her immediately, a wall of dry air that carried the scent of jet fuel and hot metal. Her dress uniform was already beginning to stick to her back, the navy blue fabric absorbing every ray of the relentless sun. She adjusted her cap and began walking toward the main gate, her footsteps echoing against the concrete barriers that surrounded the base like a modern fortress. Thunderbolt Air Base was home to the 445th Fighter Squadron, an elite unit tasked with testing and refining the operational capabilities of the F-35 program. The pilots who flew here were handpicked from the best of the best graduates of Top Gun and test pilot school, men and women who had proven themselves in combat zones around the world. The base itself was a monument to precision and power, every building designed with sharp angles and clean lines that spoke of military efficiency. Elena approached the security checkpoint with steady steps, her credentials already in hand. The guard, a young airman with close-cropped hair and suspicious eyes, barely glanced at her ID before waving her through. She could feel his gaze following her as she walked away, probably wondering what someone like her was doing at a place like this. The main administration building rose before her, its glass facade reflecting the morning sky. Inside, the air conditioning provided blessed relief from the desert heat, and Elena took a moment to orient herself. The lobby was spacious and modern, with displays showcasing the history of the F-35 program and photographs of the pilots who had made it possible. She recognized some of the faces from aviation magazines and news reports, legends in the fighter pilot community. Her orders directed her to report to Colonel James Morrison, the base commander, but the receptionist behind the front desk seemed confused when Elena introduced herself. The woman, middle-aged with graying hair and thick-rimmed glasses, shuffled through a stack of papers with growing frustration. "I'm sorry, but I don't see your name on today's arrival manifest," the receptionist said, her voice carrying a note of bureaucratic irritation. "Are you sure you're supposed to be here today?" Elena handed over her transfer orders, watching as the woman's confusion deepened. The papers were legitimate, bearing all the proper signatures and stamps, but there was something unusual about them. Instead of the detailed assignment specifications that typically accompanied pilot transfers, Elena's orders were remarkably vague, listing her only as special assignment personnel, with a classification code that the receptionist didn't recognize. "I'll need to make some calls," the woman said, reaching for her phone. "Please take a seat." Elena found a chair in the corner of the lobby and settled in to wait. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see the flight line were ground. Crews were preparing the F-35s for their morning sorties. The aircraft moved with mechanical precision, their engines spinning up with a sound like controlled thunder. She watched a pilot in full flight gear climb into the cockpit of the nearest Lightning, his movements confident and practiced. 20 minutes passed before the receptionist called her name. "Commander Vasquez, Colonel Morrison will see you now." Elena followed the woman down a hallway lined with photographs of aircraft and awards, the walls telling the story of American aviation excellence. The colonel's office was at the end of the corridor, its door bearing a brass nameplate that caught the overhead lighting. Elena knocked twice and waited for the gruff enter that came from within. Colonel Morrison was a man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and the weathered complexion of someone who had spent years in cockpits. He was seated behind a desk covered with reports and flight schedules, his expression unreadable as Elena entered and came to attention. "At ease, Commander," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "I have to admit, your arrival here has caused quite a stir. Your orders are unusual." Elena remained standing. "Sir, I was told to report for duty with the 445th Fighter Squadron. I'm qualified on the F-35 platform and ready to begin flight operations." Morrison leaned back in his chair, his eyes studying her with the intensity of a man accustomed to making quick judgments. "Commander, I've been running this base for 3 years, and I've never seen orders quite like yours. The Pentagon sent them down through channels I don't usually deal with, and frankly, the timing is problematic." He gestured to a chart on the wall showing the squadron's organizational structure. "We're in the middle of a critical evaluation period for the F-35 program. Every pilot slot is filled, every mission is planned months in advance. I'm not sure where you fit into the equation." Elena felt a familiar weight settling in her chest, the same feeling she'd experienced at every assignment throughout her career. "Sir, I'm ready to serve in whatever capacity you deem appropriate. I have over 2,000 hours of flight time, including combat experience in—" "I'm sure you do," Morrison interrupted, his tone not unkind but final. "But right now, what I need is someone to help coordinate our logistics operations. We've got a civilian contractor who handles most of our supply chain management, but we could use a military liaison to ensure everything runs smoothly." The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Elena had heard variations of this conversation before, at every assignment where her presence seemed to complicate neat organizational charts and established hierarchies. She could argue, could demand to know why her flight qualifications were being ignored, could insist on her right to compete for a pilot slot like any other officer. Instead, she said simply, "Yes, sir. When do I start?" Morrison seemed surprised by her easy acceptance. "Report to Major Patricia Williams in supply. Operations tomorrow at 0800. She gets you oriented with our procedures." Elena nodded and turned to leave, but Morrison's voice stopped her at the door. "Commander, I want you to know that this isn't personal. It's just the way things work around here. We have protocols, chains of command, established procedures. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I'm sure you understand." "Of course, sir," Elena replied, her hand on the door handle. "I understand completely." She left the administration building with her orders in hand, officially assigned to a role that had nothing to do with flying. The desert heat felt even more oppressive now, and she could hear the sound of F-35 engines in the distance, their distinctive whine a reminder of what she wasn't going to be doing. The base housing office was located in a smaller building near the commissary, and Elena spent the next hour filling out paperwork and receiving her temporary quarters assignment. The clerk, a cheerful young sergeant, seemed sympathetic to her situation. "You're getting one of the newer units," he said, handing her a set of keys. "Building 7, Unit 14. It's a studio apartment, but it's got everything you need. The laundry room is on the first floor, and there's a small fitness center in the basement." Elena thanked him and made her way to the housing area, a collection of 3-story buildings arranged around a central courtyard. The units were designed for temporary duty personnel, transient officers, and contractors who needed short-term accommodations. Most of the actual squadron pilots lived in larger quarters on the other side of the base, near the flight line. Unit 14 was on the second floor, accessible by an exterior staircase that provided a view of the flight line in the distance. Elena unlocked the door and stepped into a space that was functional but sterile, a single room with a kitchenette, a fold-out bed, and a small desk under the window. She dropped her duffel bag on the bed and walked to the window, pushing aside the standard-issue curtains to look out at the base. From her vantage point, she could see the main runway and the hangars where the F-35s were housed. Even at this distance, the aircraft looked magnificent, their angular shapes suggesting speed and lethality. She had dreamed of flying machines like these since she was a child, had dedicated her entire adult life to earning the qualifications necessary to pilot them. Elena unpacked her few belongings, hanging her uniforms in the narrow closet and placing her personal items on the desk. Among them was a photograph of her graduation from test pilot school, where she had finished third in her class despite facing obstacles that her classmates never had to consider. The photo showed her standing with her fellow graduates, all of them smiling in their dress uniforms, united by their shared achievement. That evening, she walked to the base exchange to purchase some necessities and grab dinner. The small restaurant inside was busy with off-duty personnel, their conversations mixing with the sound of overhead fans and the distant hum of aircraft engines. Elena ordered a sandwich and found a table in the corner where she could observe the social dynamics of the base. The pilots were easy to identify, even in casual clothes. They carried themselves with a particular kind of confidence, their conversations peppered with aviation terminology and good-natured competition. She watched them interact, noting the hierarchies and relationships that governed their world. At the center of the largest group sat a man in his early 30s with dark hair and an easy smile, someone who commanded attention without seeming to try. Elena learned his name when one of the younger pilots addressed him directly. "Hey, Captain Rodriguez, did you see the weather forecast for tomorrow's mission? Looks like we might get some real flying conditions." Captain Michael Rodriguez leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "That's what separates the professionals from the wannabes," he said, his voice carrying easily across the room. "Anyone can fly in perfect weather. It's when things get challenging that you find out who belongs in the cockpit." The comment drew nods of agreement from the other pilots, and Elena could see the respect they had for him. Rodriguez was clearly one of the squadron's rising stars, the kind of pilot who would eventually command his own unit. She watched him for a few more minutes, noting the way he included everyone in the conversation while maintaining his natural leadership position. As Elena finished her meal, she noticed that the pilot's conversation had shifted to upcoming assignments and training exercises. They spoke with the casual expertise of people who had dedicated their lives to mastering their craft, their technical knowledge evident in every exchange. She found herself following their discussion, her own experience allowing her to understand the complexities they were describing. One of the younger pilots, a lieutenant with red hair and freckles, was describing a particularly challenging simulation he had completed that afternoon. "The scenario threw everything at us," he said, his hands moving as he described the maneuvers. "Surface-to-air missiles, electronic countermeasures, multiple bogies coming in from different vectors. I barely managed to complete the mission." The key is staying ahead of the aircraft, Rodriguez said, his tone instructive rather than condescending. You can't just react to threats as they develop. You have to anticipate, plan 3 moves ahead, maintain situational awareness even when everything's going to hell. Elena nodded unconsciously, remembering her own experiences with similar scenarios. The advice was sound, the kind of wisdom that came from years of experience and careful study. She had learned the same lessons, often the hard way, during her own training and combat deployments. As the evening wore on, the pilots began to disperse, heading back to their quarters or to continue their conversations elsewhere. Elena remained at her table, finishing her coffee and observing the rhythm of the base. This was her new world, at least for the foreseeable future, and she needed to understand its patterns and personalities. The next morning, Elena reported to the Supply Operations Office at exactly 0800. The building was smaller than the administration complex, with a utilitarian design that prioritized function over form. Major Patricia Williams was waiting for her in the main office, a woman in her 40s with short blonde hair and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who had spent her career managing logistics. Commander Vasquez, welcome to Supply Ops, Williams sighed, standing to shake Elena's hand. I have to say, I was surprised to hear we were getting a pilot to help with coordination. Usually they send us someone from the logistics community. Elena accepted the handshake, noting the firm grip and direct eye contact. I'm happy to help in whatever capacity you need. Major, I understand you're managing the supply chain for the entire F-35 program here. Williams nodded, gesturing for Elena to follow her to a conference room adjacent to the main office. That's right. We handle everything from routine maintenance supplies to specialized components that cost more than most people's houses. The complexity is staggering, and the margin for error is essentially zero. The conference room was filled with charts, schedules, and computer monitors displaying real-time inventory data. Williams spent the next hour explaining the systems and procedures that kept the F-35 program running, the intricate web of suppliers, contractors, and military personnel that ensured the aircraft remained operational. Your job, Williams explained, will be to interface with the flight operations staff, make sure their needs are communicated clearly to our procurement team, and help resolve any issues that arise. The pilots sometimes have specific requirements that don't translate well through normal channels. Elena listened carefully, asking questions when appropriate and taking notes on a small pad she carried. The work was important, she realized, even if it wasn't what she had trained for. The F-35 program depended on seamless coordination between all its components, and supply chain management was just as critical as flight operations. As the briefing continued, Elena began to understand the scope of the challenge. Each F-35 required hundreds of different parts and components, many of them custom manufactured and available from only a single source. The maintenance schedules were complex, with different systems requiring attention at different intervals. A single missed delivery or delayed shipment could ground an aircraft for days or weeks. The pilots don't always understand the constraints we're working under, Williams said with a slight smile. They tend to think that parts appear magically when they need them. Your job is to help bridge that gap, make sure everyone's on the same page. Elena spent the rest of the morning reviewing procedures and familiarizing herself with the computer systems. The software was sophisticated, tracking thousands of parts and components across multiple suppliers and warehouses. She could see the patterns in the data, the ebb and flow of demand that corresponded to flight schedules and maintenance cycles. During her lunch break, Elena walked to the base library, a small but well-equipped facility that served the educational needs of the personnel stationed at Thunderbolt. She found a quiet corner and opened her laptop, using the base's internet connection to research the latest developments in F-35 technology and operations. The Lightning II was still relatively new, having only achieved full operational capability. In recent years, the program had faced numerous challenges during its development, from cost overruns to technical difficulties, but the resulting aircraft was arguably the most advanced fighter jet ever built. Its stealth capabilities, sensor fusion, and networking features represented a quantum leap in military aviation technology. Elena read through technical reports and operational assessments, her pilot's training allowing her to understand the nuances of the aircraft's performance characteristics. The F-35 was designed to be a multi-role platform, capable of air-to-air combat, ground attack missions, and reconnaissance operations. Its sophisticated avionics suite provided pilots with unprecedented situational awareness, integrating data from multiple sources into a coherent tactical picture. As she read, Elena couldn't help but imagine herself in the cockpit of one of these remarkable machines. She had flown older generation fighters, had experienced the thrill of high-performance flight, but the F-35 represented something entirely different. It was not just an aircraft but a complete combat system, designed to dominate the modern battlefield. The afternoon brought her first real interaction with the pilot she was supposed to be supporting. Captain Rodriguez arrived at the Supply Operations Office with a list of requirements for an upcoming training exercise, his flight suit still bearing the marks of a morning sortie. "Major Williams," he said, acknowledging Elena with a polite nod, "we're going to need some specialized ordnance for next week's exercise. The scenario calls for precision strikes against simulated hardened targets." Williams reviewed the request, her expression thoughtful. "This is going to be challenging, Captain. Some of these items have long lead times, and our current inventory is already committed to other missions." Rodriguez's jaw tightened slightly. "Major, this exercise is part of the official evaluation process. We can't postpone it or modify the requirements. The Pentagon is expecting specific results." Elena looked up from her computer screen, her attention drawn by the tension in the conversation. She had been reviewing the inventory data for the past several hours, and she recognized the items Rodriguez was requesting. More importantly, she understood why they were critical to the mission's success. "Excuse me," she said, standing from her desk. "I might have a solution." Both Rodriguez and Williams turned to look at her, surprise evident in their expressions. Elena felt a familiar flutter of nervousness, the same feeling she had experienced countless times when inserting herself into conversations where her presence wasn't expected. "There's a batch of the ordnance you need sitting in the warehouse at Nellis Air Force Base," she continued, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "It was ordered for a training exercise that was canceled last month. If we can arrange a transfer, we could have it here within 48 hours. Rodriguez's eyebrows rose. "How do you know about that?" Elena gestured to her computer screen, where she had been tracking inventory across multiple bases. "I've been reviewing the supply chain data for the entire region. The parts are there, they're available, and they meet the specifications for your exercise." Williams leaned over to look at Elena's screen, her expression changing as she verified the information. "She's right. I had no idea this inventory was available. How did you find it?" "I've been mapping the entire supply network," Elena replied. "I wanted to understand how all the pieces fit together, identify potential bottlenecks and alternative sources. This is exactly the kind of situation where cross-base coordination can solve problems." Rodriguez looked impressed despite himself. "That's actually very helpful. Can you arrange the transfer?" Elena nodded. "I'll need Major Williams' authorization, but I can have the paperwork started within the hour. The transfer should be completed by Thursday morning." As Rodriguez left the office with his problem solved, Elena caught Williams watching her with a new expression. "That was impressive work, Commander. I have to admit, I wasn't sure what to expect when they told me I was getting a pilot to help with logistics. But you seem to have a natural aptitude for this." Elena smiled, feeling a small sense of accomplishment. Thank you, Major. I believe that understanding the entire system is the key to making it work effectively. The rest of the week passed in a similar pattern. Elena threw herself into her work, learning the intricacies of the supply chain and finding ways to improve efficiency and solve problems. She spent her evenings in the base library, researching everything she could about the F-35 program and the challenges facing modern military aviation. Her temporary quarters began to feel more like home as she settled into the routine of base life. She established a morning exercise routine, running the perimeter road before dawn when the desert air was still cool. The physical activity helped clear her mind and prepare her for the challenges of each day. During her runs, Elena often encountered other base personnel beginning their own daily routines. She exchanged polite greetings with the maintenance crews heading to the flight line, the security personnel rotating shifts, and the occasional pilot heading to an early briefing. These interactions were brief but friendly, helping her feel more connected to the base community. One morning, as she was completing her run near the flight line, Elena heard the distinctive sound of an F-35 engine starting up. She slowed her pace and moved to the fence line, watching as ground crews prepared one of the aircraft for flight. The pre-flight routine was a choreographed dance of technical precision, each crew member performing their assigned tasks with practiced efficiency. The pilot emerged from the squadron building, walking toward the aircraft with the confident stride of someone completely at home in their environment. Elena recognized Captain Rodriguez, his helmet tucked under his arm and his flight suit perfectly fitted. He conducted his own pre-flight inspection, checking control surfaces and examining the aircraft's exterior with the thoroughness of a professional. As Rodriguez climbed into the cockpit, Elena found herself imagining what it would feel like to strap into that seat, to feel the power of the F-35's engine beneath her, to experience the incredible performance of the most advanced fighter aircraft ever built. The longing was almost physical, a deep ache that reminded her of everything she had worked for and everything she was being denied. The Lightning II taxied to the runway with mechanical precision, its movements controlled and deliberate. Elena watched as it aligned with the center line, the engine note changing as Rodriguez advanced the throttle. The aircraft began to roll, accelerating smoothly down the runway until it lifted off with the grace of a bird taking flight. Elena stood at the fence until the aircraft disappeared into the morning sky, its afterburner trail dissipating in the desert air. She felt a complex mix of emotions, admiration for the machine and its pilot, frustration at her own situation, and a renewed determination to prove herself worthy of the opportunities she was being denied. The sound of footsteps behind her broke her reverie. She turned to see Major Williams approaching, dressed in her own exercise clothes and carrying a water bottle. "Beautiful sight, isn't it?" Williams said, joining Elena at the fence. "I've been here for 2 years, and I still get goosebumps watching those birds take off." Elena nodded. "It's an incredible machine. The engineering that went into it is remarkable." Williams studied her profile for a moment. "You know, I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday. You seem to understand these aircraft better than most of the logistics personnel I've worked with. Have you spent much time around the F-35 program?" Elena chose her words carefully. "I've studied the technical specifications extensively. I believe that understanding the capabilities and limitations of the aircraft is essential to supporting its operations effectively." "That's true, Williams." "Agreed. But there's something else, isn't there? The way you look at these planes, the way you talk about them. It's more than just professional interest." Elena felt a moment of vulnerability, the urge to share her frustration and ambition with someone who might understand. Instead, she simply said, "I've always been fascinated by aviation. It's what drew me to the military in the first place." Williams nodded, seeming to accept the explanation. "Well, whatever your background, you're doing excellent work in supply ops. I hope you know that your contributions are appreciated." As they walked back toward the base buildings, Elena reflected on the Major's words. She was making a difference, even if it wasn't in the way she had originally envisioned. The supply chain work was important, and she was genuinely helping to improve the efficiency of the operation. But as another F-35 roared overhead, heading out for a training mission, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that she was capable of so much more. She had the skills, the training, and the experience to be in that cockpit, to contribute to the mission in ways that her current assignment didn't allow. The challenge was proving it to people who had already made up their minds about where she belonged. Elena had faced similar situations before, had overcome skepticism and prejudice through persistence and excellence. This assignment would be no different, even if the path forward wasn't yet clear. As she headed back to her quarters to prepare for another day in supply operations, Elena made a silent promise to herself. She would continue to excel in her current role, would prove her value to the organization in whatever capacity they allowed. But she would also remain ready for any opportunity that might arise, any chance to demonstrate her true capabilities. The F-35 program was too important, and her own dreams too persistent, for her to accept anything less than the chance to prove herself where it mattered most. In the cockpit of the world's most advanced fighter aircraft, defending her country, and pushing the boundaries of what was possible in military aviation. Elena Vasquez had not come to Thunderbolt Air Base to manage supply chains or coordinate logistics. She had come to fly. And somehow, someway, she was going to make that happen. 3 weeks into her assignment at Thunderbolt Air Base, Elena Vasquez had established herself as the most competent logistics coordinator Major Williams had ever worked with. Her ability to track complex supply chains, anticipate shortages, and solve procurement problems had already saved the squadron thousands of dollars and prevented multiple mission delays. Yet every morning, as she walked past the flight line, on her way to the supply operations building, she felt the weight of her unused pilot wings pressing against her chest. The morning briefings had become a particular source of frustration. Elena was required to attend these sessions to provide supply status updates, but she was expected to sit in the back of the room while the real pilots discussed mission parameters, weather conditions, and tactical considerations. She watched them lean over charts and computer displays, their conversations filled with the technical language she knew as well as her own name, and she remained silent. Captain Rodriguez had emerged as the squadron's unofficial leader among the younger pilots. His performance in the F-35 was exceptional, and his natural charisma made him someone the other aviators looked up to. Elena observed the way he carried himself during briefings, the confidence in his voice when he discussed complex flight scenarios, the respect he commanded from both his peers and his superiors. During one particularly detailed mission briefing, the squadron was tasked with a simulated deep strike against a heavily defended target complex. The scenario required precise coordination between multiple aircraft, with some F-35s providing electronic warfare support while others delivered ordnance against specific targets. Elena listened from her position near the back wall, following every detail of the tactical plan. The mission commander, Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Chun, was explaining the approach vectors when she paused to address a technical question about the aircraft's sensor fusion capabilities. "The F-35's distributed aperture system will give us complete spherical coverage," she said, gesturing to a diagram on the main display. "But we need to be aware of the electromagnetic signature we'll be presenting to enemy sensors." Elena shifted in her chair, her mind immediately jumping to a potential issue with the planned approach. The route the squadron was planning would take them through an area where the aircraft's stealth characteristics might be compromised by a specific type of radar configuration. She had studied similar scenarios extensively during her time at test pilot school, and she knew there was a more effective approach vector that would minimize their exposure. For a moment, she considered raising her hand and offering her input. The tactical knowledge was there. The understanding of the aircraft's capabilities was clear in her mind, and she could see a way to improve the mission's chances of success. But as she looked around the room at the faces of the pilots who barely acknowledged her presence, she remained silent. The briefing continued without her contribution, and the squadron launched their mission using the original plan. Elena spent the morning in her office, tracking the exercise through radio communications and computer displays. When the results were analyzed later that afternoon, it became clear that the approach vector she had identified in her mind would have been significantly more effective. 3 of the F-35s had been shot down by simulated enemy fire that could have been avoided with a different route. Captain Rodriguez stopped by the supply operations office later that day, his flight suit still damp with sweat from the morning's exercise. He looked frustrated, the kind of expression pilots wore when they knew they could have performed better. "Rough morning?" Elena asked, looking up from her computer screen. Rodriguez nodded, running a hand through his hair. "We walked right into their engagement envelope. Should have seen it coming, but the intelligence briefing made it sound like the threat systems were positioned differently." Elena hesitated for a moment, then decided to take a small risk. "The radar configuration they were using is particularly effective against our approach angle," she said carefully. "There's a study from the test pilot school that analyzed similar scenarios. A northern approach vector might have avoided the worst of their coverage." Rodriguez's eyebrows rose slightly. "You've read the TPS studies on F-35 tactics?" "I try to stay current on aviation developments," Elena replied, her tone neutral. "It helps me understand the operational requirements when I'm managing supply requests." Rodriguez studied her for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "That's actually more detailed knowledge than I would have expected from someone in logistics. Where did you pick up that kind of technical background?" Elena felt the familiar tension that came with these conversations, the careful balance between revealing her qualifications and maintaining the role she had been assigned. "I've always been interested in aviation," she said simply. "I like to understand how the systems I'm supporting actually work." Before Rodriguez could ask any follow-up questions, Major Williams emerged from her office with a stack of procurement forms that required immediate attention. The conversation ended, but Elena caught Rodriguez looking at her with a new expression, something that might have been curiosity mixed with respect. The incident marked the beginning of a subtle shift in Elena's daily routine. She began to pay even closer attention to the mission briefings, not just for the supply implications, but for the tactical and operational details. She started arriving at the office earlier each morning, using the extra time to review intelligence reports and technical bulletins that crossed her desk. Elena also began to notice patterns in the squadron's performance that others seemed to miss. The F-35 was an incredibly sophisticated aircraft, but it required a deep understanding of its systems to achieve maximum effectiveness. Some of the pilots, despite their impressive credentials, seemed to be struggling with specific aspects of the aircraft's operation. Lieutenant Jennifer Park, a recent graduate from the Naval Academy and Flight School, was having particular difficulty with the F-35's sensor fusion displays. Elena had observed her during post-flight debriefings, noting the frustration in the young pilot's voice when she described information overload in the cockpit. The Lightning's advanced avionics could present enormous amounts of data to the pilot, but managing that information flow required training and experience that some aviators hadn't yet developed. Elena found herself wanting to offer advice, to share the knowledge she had gained during her own extensive training on advanced aircraft systems. But she remained in her assigned role, watching from the sidelines as talented pilots struggled with challenges she knew how to solve. The social dynamics of the base were becoming clearer to Elena as well. The pilots formed a tight-knit community, bound together by shared experiences and mutual respect. They had their own traditions, their own language, their own ways of establishing hierarchy and belonging. Elena was clearly outside this circle, viewed as support personnel rather than a peer. The exclusion was most apparent during informal gatherings. After particularly challenging missions, the pilots often gathered at the base club to debrief over drinks and discuss their experiences. Elena had never been invited to these sessions, though she sometimes saw them through the windows as she walked past on her evening runs. One Friday afternoon, after a week of particularly complex training exercises, Elena was working late in the supply operations office when she heard voices in the hallway outside. Through the partially open door, she could see Captain Rodriguez and Lieutenant Park walking toward the exit, their conversation animated. "I'm telling you, the sensor management is killing me," Park was saying, her voice filled with frustration. "I can fly the aircraft just fine, but when all those displays start flashing and the threat warnings are going off, I feel like I'm drinking from a fire hose." Rodriguez nodded sympathetically. "It's a learning curve for everyone. The F-35's information systems are unlike anything we've flown before. You just have to give yourself time to develop the mental models." Elena listened to their conversation fade as they moved down the hallway, her hands clenched into fists on her desk. She knew exactly what Park was experiencing, had faced the same challenges during her own transition to advanced aircraft systems. More importantly, she knew specific techniques and training methods that could help the young pilot overcome her difficulties. The knowledge felt like a weight in her chest, unused and unshared. Elena had spent years developing expertise that could benefit the squadron, could help pilots like Park achieve their full potential, could contribute to the success of the F-35 program. Instead, she was managing inventory spreadsheets and coordinating parts deliveries. That evening, Elena stayed in the office until well after sunset, ostensibly working on a quarterly supply report, but actually reviewing everything she could find about the squadron's recent performance. The mission data was available to her as part of her logistics coordination role, and she found herself analyzing flight patterns, fuel consumption rates, and weapons employment statistics with the eye of an experienced test pilot. The patterns she discovered were troubling. The squadron's performance metrics were good by most standards, but Elena could see areas where they were falling short of the F-35's true potential. Fuel efficiency was lower than optimal on long-range missions. Weapons accuracy was adequate, but not exceptional. Most concerning, there had been several incidents where pilots had been unable to take full advantage of the aircraft's stealth and sensor capabilities. Elena began to compile her observations into a detailed analysis, working late into the night to document the issues she had identified and the potential solutions she could envision. The report grew to dozens of pages filled with technical diagrams, performance charts, and specific recommendations for training improvements. When she finally finished, Elena sat back in her chair and stared at the document on her computer screen. It represented hours of careful analysis and years of accumulated expertise. It could genuinely help improve the squadron's performance and contribute to the success of the F-35 program. But she had no official avenue for presenting it, no authority to offer such recommendations, no standing to critique the performance of qualified pilots. Elena saved the file and locked her computer, then walked back to her quarters through the quiet streets of the base. The desert air was cool after the heat of the day, and she could see the lights of the Fighter 5 hangars in the distance. Tomorrow would bring another day of managing supply chains and coordinating deliveries, another day of watching from the sidelines as others flew the mission she dreamed of. The weekend brought a different rhythm to the base. Most of the pilots were off duty, and the flight line was quieter without the constant cycle of training missions. Elena used the time to catch up on administrative work and to continue her unofficial analysis of the squadron's operations. On Saturday morning, she was walking past the main hangar when she heard voices coming from inside. Through the partially open door, she could see Captain Rodriguez and two other pilots examining one of the F-35s. They appeared to be discussing some kind of technical issue, their conversation focused and serious. Elena slowed her pace, curious about what had drawn them to the aircraft on their day off. She could hear fragments of their discussion, enough to understand that they were concerned about some aspect of the F-35's performance during recent missions. "The energy management just doesn't feel right," one of the pilots was saying. "I'm following all the procedures, but the aircraft's not responding the way the manual says it should." Rodriguez nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I've noticed the same thing. It's subtle, but there's definitely something off about the power curve during certain maneuvers." Elena found herself moving closer to the hangar entrance, drawn by the technical nature of their discussion. The issue they were describing was familiar to her, something she had encountered during her own experience with advanced fighter aircraft. The F-35's energy management characteristics were complex, requiring a deep understanding of the relationship between airspeed, altitude, and engine performance. As she listened, Elena realized that the pilots were experiencing a common problem that many aviators faced when transitioning to the Lightning. The aircraft's flight characteristics were different from traditional fighters, and the techniques that worked in older aircraft didn't always translate directly to the F-35. There were specific procedures and methods that could help pilots adapt more quickly, but they weren't always covered in standard training programs. Elena was so focused on their conversation that she didn't notice the maintenance technician approaching from behind until he spoke. "Can I help you with something, ma'am?" the sergeant asked, his tone polite but curious. Elena turned, suddenly, aware that she was standing outside the hangar, listening to a private conversation between off-duty pilots. The three aviators inside had heard the technician's question and were now looking in her direction. "I was just walking by," Elena said, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. "I heard voices and wondered if there was some kind of emergency." Rodriguez stepped closer to the hangar entrance, his expression unreadable. "No emergency. Just some shop talk about aircraft performance. Nothing that would concern the supply department." The dismissal was polite, but clear. Elena nodded and continued on her way, but she could feel their eyes following her as she walked away. The incident reinforced her position as an outsider, someone who might overhear their conversations, but who wasn't welcome to participate in them. That afternoon, Elena decided to visit the base fitness center to work off her frustration. The facility was well equipped, with modern cardio machines and a comprehensive weight room. She found it mostly empty, with just a few off-duty personnel maintaining their fitness routines. Elena had always used physical exercise as a way to clear her mind and process stress. As she ran on the treadmill, she found herself thinking about the conversation she had overheard in the hangar. The pilot's concerns about energy management were valid, and she knew she could help them find solutions. But her unofficial status and their assumptions about her role made such assistance impossible. After her workout, Elena was walking back to her quarters when she encountered Lieutenant Park near the base exchange. The young pilot looked tired and discouraged, carrying a stack of technical manuals under her arm. "Evening, Lieutenant," Elena said, offering a friendly nod. Park looked up, seeming slightly surprised by the greeting. "Oh, hello. You're the logistics coordinator, right?" "Commander Vasquez?" Elena nodded. "That's right. Those look like some heavy reading you've got there." Park glanced down at the manuals with a rueful expression. "Yeah, I'm trying to get a better handle on the F-35 systems. Spending my weekend studying sensor fusion algorithms and threat prioritization matrices." Elena felt a pang of sympathy for the young pilot. She remembered her own struggles with complex aircraft systems, the long hours spent studying technical manuals and trying to translate theoretical knowledge into practical skill. "The F-35's information management systems can be challenging," Elena said carefully. "The aircraft processes enormous amounts of data, And learning to prioritize and filter that information takes time. Park's expression brightened slightly. Exactly. It's like trying to drink from a fire hose. I know all the individual systems, but putting it all together in real time is overwhelming. Elena hesitated for a moment, then decided to offer a small piece of advice. One technique that some pilots find helpful is to start with the threat displays and work outward from there. The aircraft's computer does an excellent job of prioritizing immediate dangers, so if you focus on those first, you can build your situational awareness systematically. Park's eyes widened slightly. That's actually really good advice. How did you learn about F-35 operational techniques? Elena felt the familiar tension of these conversations, the need to balance honesty with her assigned role. I make it a point to understand the systems I'm supporting, she said. It helps me anticipate what kinds of parts and equipment the squadron might need. Before Park could ask any follow-up questions, another pilot approached from the direction of the base club. Elena recognized him as Lieutenant Commander David Walsh, one of the more senior aviators in the squadron. "Hey Park," Walsh called out. "We're having an impromptu briefing session at the club. Going over some of the tactical scenarios from this week. You should join us." Park looked torn between the invitation and her pile of technical manuals. "I should probably keep studying," she said. "I'm still struggling with some of the basic systems integration." Walsh glanced at Elena, his expression politely dismissive. "Well, the invitation's open if you change your mind. We'll be there for a couple of hours." As Walsh walked away, Elena saw an opportunity to help Park without overstepping her boundaries. "You should go," she said. "Learning from experienced pilots is just as valuable as studying manuals. Maybe more so." Park considered this for a moment, then smiled. "You know what? You're right. Thanks for the advice, Commander." Elena watched Park hurry toward the base club, carrying her technical manuals with her. It was a small victory, perhaps, but Elena felt a sense of satisfaction in having helped a fellow aviator, even in such a limited way. The following week brought new challenges and frustrations. The squadron was preparing for a major evaluation exercise that would test their readiness for deployment to overseas combat zones. The pressure was intense, with long days of mission planning and systems checks that kept everyone on edge. Elena found herself working longer hours as well, coordinating the complex logistics required to support the increased operational tempo. Parts and equipment were flowing through the supply system at an unprecedented rate, and every detail had to be perfect to avoid any delays or shortfalls. During one particularly busy afternoon, Elena was reviewing maintenance schedules when Captain Rodriguez appeared at her desk with an urgent request. His usual confidence seemed strained, and there was tension in his voice as he explained the situation. "We've got a problem with the navigation systems on aircraft 847, he said, placing a thick folder on Elena's desk. "The inertial guidance unit is showing intermittent faults, and we need a replacement before tomorrow's mission." Elena opened the folder and quickly reviewed the technical specifications. The component Rodriguez was requesting was highly specialized and expensive, with a limited number of suppliers. More problematically, it typically required several weeks of lead time to procure. "This is a challenging request," Elena said her fingers already moving across her computer keyboard as she searched the supply databases. "The part number you've specified is on back order from the primary manufacturer, and the secondary sources are showing similar delays." Rodriguez's jaw tightened. "Commander, this mission cannot be delayed. The evaluation team is expecting specific performance metrics, and aircraft 847 is configured with unique sensor packages that we can't duplicate on other airframes." Elena continued her search, expanding her inquiry to include military bases across the country and allied nations. The inertial guidance unit was a critical component of the F-35's navigation system, And finding a replacement on short notice would require creativity and persistence. After several minutes of intensive searching, Elena found a potential solution. "There's a unit available at Edwards Air Force Base," she said, looking up at Rodriguez. "It's currently installed in a test aircraft, but it's scheduled for removal next week as part of a system upgrade." Rodriguez leaned forward, his interest clearly piqued. "Can we get it here in time?" Elena was already reaching for her phone. "I'll need to coordinate with their logistics department and arrange for expedited shipping. It's going to require some creative paperwork and probably a few favors, but I think I can make it happen." Over the next several hours, Elena worked with quiet intensity to arrange the transfer. She spoke with logistics coordinators at Edwards, negotiated with shipping companies, and completed the complex paperwork required to move sensitive military equipment between bases. The process required her to use connections she had developed throughout her career, calling in favors from colleagues who trusted her reputation and competence. By late that evening, Elena had secured the inertial guidance unit and arranged for it to be delivered to Thunderbolt Air Base by 0600 the following morning. The cost was significant and the bureaucratic complications were substantial, but the mission would proceed as scheduled. Captain Rodriguez returned to the supply operations office just as Elena was finishing the final arrangements. He looked exhausted from a long day of mission preparation, but his expression brightened when Elena gave him the news. "You actually pulled it off," he said, genuine admiration in his voice. "I have to admit, I wasn't sure anyone could arrange that kind of transfer overnight." Elena allowed herself a small smile. It required some creative problem solving, but that's what we're here for. The mission comes first. Rodriguez studied her for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "You know, I'm starting to think there's more to you than meets the eye, Commander. The way you understand these systems, the connections you have throughout the supply network, it's impressive." Elena felt a flush of pride at the recognition, but she kept her response professional. "I just try to do my job as effectively as possible." Before Rodriguez could respond, his radio crackled to life with a call from the Squadron Operations Center. He listened to the brief message, then turned back to Elena with an apologetic expression. "I've got to run," he said. "But seriously, thank you for making this happen. You might have just saved our entire evaluation." As Rodriguez hurried away, Elena reflected on the interaction. For the first time since arriving at Thunderbolt Air Base, she felt like her contributions were being recognized and valued. It wasn't the same as being trusted with an F-35, but it was progress. The evaluation exercise began the following morning with a complex scenario designed to test every aspect of the squadron's capabilities. Elena watched the proceedings from the command center, monitoring communications and tracking the performance of the aircraft she had helped keep airborne. The F-35 with the replacement inertial guidance unit performed flawlessly, its navigation systems providing precise positioning data throughout the mission. Elena felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that her work had contributed to the squadron's success, even if her role remained largely invisible to most of the participants. As the days passed, Elena began to notice subtle changes in how some of the pilots interacted with her. Captain Rodriguez made a point of stopping by her office to provide updates on how the equipment she had procured was performing. Lieutenant Park occasionally asked for her thoughts on technical issues, treating her opinions with genuine respect. The changes were small but significant. Elena was beginning to establish herself as more than just a logistics coordinator, earning recognition for her technical knowledge and problem-solving abilities. It wasn't the acknowledgement she ultimately sought, but it was a foundation upon which she could build. One evening, as Elena was finishing her daily reports, she received an unexpected visit from Lieutenant Colonel Chun, the squadron's deputy commander. Chun was a respected aviator with extensive combat experience, and her presence in the supply operations office was unusual. "Commander Vasquez," Chun said, taking a seat across from Elena's desk. "I wanted to personally thank you for your work during the evaluation exercise. Captain Rodriguez tells me that your quick thinking and logistics expertise were crucial to our success." Elena felt a mix of pride and nervousness at the recognition from such a senior officer. "Thank you, ma'am. I was just doing my job." Chun smiled. "Maybe so, but you're doing it exceptionally well. I've been reviewing your work over the past month, and I'm impressed by your attention to detail and your understanding of our operational requirements." Elena waited, sensing that there was more to this conversation than simple recognition. "I'm wondering," Chun continued, "if you might be interested in taking on some additional responsibilities. We're always looking for officers who can bridge the gap between operations and logistics, who understand both the technical and practical aspects of what we do here." Elena's heart rate quickened. "What kind of additional responsibilities?" Chun leaned forward slightly. "I'd like you to start attending our mission planning sessions as a technical advisor. Your insights into systems capabilities and equipment availability could be valuable to our operational planning process." Elena felt a surge of excitement at the opportunity to be more directly involved in flight operations, even if it wasn't in the cockpit. "I would be honored to contribute in that capacity, ma'am." Chun nodded, her expression satisfied. "Excellent. We'll start with tomorrow morning's planning session for next week's training missions. I think you'll find it interesting." As Chun left the office, Elena sat back in her chair and allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. It wasn't the pilot assignment she ultimately wanted, but it was progress. She was being recognized for her capabilities and given an opportunity to contribute more directly to the squadron's mission. Elena spent the rest of the evening preparing for her new role, reviewing the latest intelligence reports and technical bulletins that would inform the next day's planning session. She was determined to make the most of this opportunity to demonstrate that her knowledge and expertise could benefit the squadron in ways that went beyond traditional logistic support. The path forward was becoming clearer. Elena would continue to excel in whatever role she was given, building trust and recognition one interaction at a time. Eventually, she believed, the right opportunity would present itself. And when it did, she would be ready to prove that she belonged in the cockpit of an F-35 Lightning II, serving her country as the pilot she had trained to be. For now, though, she would take satisfaction in the progress she had made and the recognition she had earned. Elena Vasquez was no longer just a logistics coordinator who happened to understand aviation. She was becoming an integral part of the squadron's operations, a trusted advisor whose expertise was valued and sought after. The journey was far from over, but Elena could feel momentum building. Each day brought new challenges and new opportunities to demonstrate her capabilities. She was patient, persistent, and utterly determined to achieve her goals. The F-35 Lightning II remained her ultimate objective. But she was learning that there were many ways to contribute to the mission while working toward that dream. As Elena locked her office and headed back to her quarters, she could hear the sound of an F-35 engine spinning down in the distance. The aircraft was returning from a late training mission, its pilot no doubt tired, but satisfied with another successful flight. Someday soon, Elena promised herself, she would be the one climbing out of that cockpit, having pushed the limits of the most advanced fighter aircraft ever built. But until that day came, she would continue to prove herself. In whatever capacity she was given, building the reputation and relationships that would eventually open the doors she sought. Elena Vasquez had learned that patience could be just as powerful as persistence, and that sometimes the longest route to a destination was also the most rewarding. The desert night was clear and cool as Elena walked home, the stars brilliant overhead and the lights of the base stretching out around her. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities, and she was ready for all of them. The crisis began at 0347 hours on a Tuesday morning with a single, encrypted message that would change everything at Thunderbolt Air Base. Elena was already awake, sitting at her small desk reviewing supply projections for the upcoming month, when her secure communication device buzzed with an urgent priority alert. The message was brief but electrifying in its implications. Joint Task Force Viper had encountered unexpected resistance during the critical operation in the South China Sea. An enemy naval fleet, supported by advanced surface-to-air missile systems and fifth-generation fighter aircraft, had moved into position faster than intelligence had predicted. The task force was requesting immediate air support from the nearest available F-35 squadron, and Thunderbolt Air Base was the only unit within operational range that could respond in time. Elena dressed quickly and hurried to the command center, where she found the base already buzzing with activity. Emergency lighting cast harsh shadows across the walls as personnel rushed between workstations, their voices mixing with the constant chatter of radio communications. Colonel Morrison stood at the center of the controlled chaos, his expression grim as he coordinated the squadron's response to the crisis. The tactical situation was complex and dangerous. Joint Task Force Viper was operating near a series of disputed islands, conducting a time-sensitive mission to extract a downed reconnaissance aircraft and its crew before enemy forces could capture sensitive intelligence equipment. The task force had expected to complete the operation under cover of darkness with minimal resistance, but the unexpected arrival of enemy naval assets had turned a routine extraction into a potential disaster. Elena found Lieutenant Colonel Xian near the main tactical display, studying satellite imagery and real-time intelligence feeds. The deputy commander's expression was focused but concerned as she tracked the movement of enemy forces and calculated response options. "The window is closing fast," Chun was explaining to a group of senior officers. "Our task force has maybe 90 minutes before those enemy destroyers move into position to cut off their withdrawal route. We need to get F-35s in the air now, to provide air cover and suppress those surface-to-air missile sites." Elena moved closer to the display, her trained eye immediately grasping the tactical complexity of the situation. The enemy had positioned their forces in a layered defense that would be challenging for any aircraft to penetrate. The surface-to-air missile systems were state-of-the-art, capable of engaging multiple targets simultaneously and coordinated through an advanced command network. Even more concerning, intelligence indicated the presence of enemy stealth fighters that could pose a significant threat to American aircraft. Colonel Morrison was coordinating with the Flight Operations Center, his voice tight with urgency. "How quickly can we get 6 F-35s configured and airborne?" The operations officer, a major Elena didn't recognize, was consulting multiple status boards and computer displays. "Sir, we can have the aircraft loaded and ready for launch within 40 minutes. The challenge is pilot availability." Elena felt a chill run down her spine as she heard those words. She watched as Morrison's expression darkened, and she could sense the tension building in the command center. "What do you mean, pilot availability?" Morrison demanded. The operations officer took a deep breath before responding. "Sir, we have a significant problem. Captain Rodriguez and Lieutenant Park are both grounded with food poisoning from last night's off-base dinner. Lieutenant Commander Walsh is at Nellis for advanced training and won't return until Thursday. Major Thompson is on emergency leave due to a family medical situation." Elena watched as the colonel's face went pale. The squadron's best pilots, the ones with the most experience in the F-35 and the tactical knowledge necessary for this kind of complex mission, were unavailable at the worst possible moment. "That leaves us with 4 qualified pilots," the operations officer continued. "But 3 of them are junior aviators with less than 200 hours in the F-35. They're not cleared for this level of combat operations." Elena's heart began to race as she realized the implications. The squadron had the aircraft, the weapons, and the support systems necessary to respond to the crisis, but they lacked the human element that could make it all work. The F-35 Lightning II was an incredibly sophisticated machine, but it required skilled pilots who understood its capabilities and limitations to be effective in combat. Morrison turned to Lieutenant Colonel Chun, his expression desperate. Options? Chun studied the tactical display for a long moment before responding. We could request support from other units, but the nearest F-35 squadron is at least 3 hours away. By the time they could respond, our task force would be in serious trouble. What about using the pilots we have available? Morrison asked. I know they're junior, but this is an emergency. Elena watched as Chun shook her head slowly. Sir, the tactical situation is too complex for inexperienced pilots. The enemy air defenses are sophisticated, and there are friendly forces operating in close proximity to the target area. We need aviators who can handle multiple threats simultaneously, while coordinating with naval forces and conducting precision strikes. One mistake could result in friendly casualties or mission failure. The command center fell into a tense silence as the implications became clear. Elena could see the frustration and helplessness on the faces of the officers around her. They had the tools they needed to help the task force, but they lacked the expertise to use those tools effectively. Elena found herself studying the tactical display with growing intensity, her mind automatically processing the enemy positions and potential attack routes. The mission was challenging but not impossible, she realized. The key was understanding the layered nature of the enemy defenses and finding the gaps in their coverage that would allow F-35s to penetrate and engage their targets. As she watched the enemy positions update on the display, Elena began to see a pattern that others might have missed. The surface-to-air missile sites were positioned to provide overlapping coverage, but there were brief windows when their radar systems would be masked by terrain features or electronic interference from their own ships. A pilot who understood these systems and could time their approach precisely could exploit these vulnerabilities. Elena's hands were trembling slightly as she realized she was looking at a mission she could fly. More than that, it was a mission that required exactly the kind of expertise she had spent years developing during her time at test pilot school and in combat operations. She understood the F-35 stealth characteristics better than almost anyone, knew how to exploit its sensor fusion capabilities in complex threat environments, and had the tactical knowledge necessary to coordinate with naval forces. For several minutes, Elena remained silent, watching as the senior officer struggled with an impossible decision. She could see the weight of responsibility on their shoulders, the knowledge that lives were at stake and that any choice they made could have serious consequences. Finally, as the tension in the room reached a breaking point, Elena took a step forward. Colonel Morrison, she said, her voice steady despite the racing of her heart. I can fly this mission. The command center fell silent, every conversation stopping as heads turned toward Elena. For a moment, nobody moved or spoke, as if her words had frozen time itself. Morrison was the first to recover, his expression shifting from surprise to confusion. Commander Vasquez, I appreciate the offer, but you're assigned to logistics operations. We need qualified F-35 pilots for this mission. Elena took another step forward, her confidence building with each word. Sir, I am a qualified F-35 pilot. I have over 1,500 hours in the Lightning II, including combat operations in 3 different theaters. I'm current on all weapon systems and certified for operations in contested airspace. The silence that followed was profound. Elena could see the shock and disbelief on the faces around her, could almost hear the mental calculations as people tried to reconcile her claims with their assumptions about her role at the base. Lieutenant Colonel Chun was the first to speak, her voice carefully controlled. Commander, your service record shows assignment to logistics operations. There's no mention of pilot training or F-35 qualifications. Elena felt a surge of nervous energy as she prepared to reveal information she had kept hidden for weeks. Ma'am, my current assignment is the result of an administrative error in the personnel system. My actual qualifications include graduation from test pilot school, completion of the F-35 integrated training program, and combat certification on the Lightning II platform. Morrison's expression was shifting from confusion to something that might have been hope. Can you prove these qualifications? Elena reached into her pocket and withdrew a small data card that she had carried with her since arriving at Thunderbolt Air Base. My complete service record and training certifications are on this secure device. The information was classified under a special access program, which is why it didn't appear in standard personnel files. Colonel Morrison took the data card. With hands that were not entirely steady, he inserted it into a secure terminal and began scrolling through the information that appeared on the screen. Elena watched his expression change as he reviewed her qualifications, saw his eyebrows rise as he encountered certifications and achievements that few pilots could claim. Test Pilot School, top 5% of class, Morrison read aloud. F-35. Weapons Employment Certification, Air-to-Air and Air-to-Ground. Combat deployments with the 34th Fighter Squadron, including operations against advanced air defense systems. Elena could feel the attention of everyone in the command center, focusing on her with new intensity. The assumptions and expectations that had governed her interactions with these people for weeks were crumbling as the truth of her background became clear. Lieutenant Colonel Chun moved to look at the terminal screen, her expression shifting from skepticism to amazement. Commander, these qualifications are extraordinary. Why weren't you assigned to flight operations when you arrived here? Elena chose her words carefully, knowing that her response would shape everything that followed. The assignment error occurred during a transition between special programs. Rather than fight the bureaucracy, I chose to accept the logistics role and wait for an opportunity to demonstrate my actual capabilities. Morrison looked up from the terminal, his expression now showing a mixture of admiration and urgency. Commander, can you honestly tell me that you're ready to lead this mission? The tactical situation is extremely complex and the risks are significant. Elena met his gaze without flinching. Sir, I've studied every aspect of this base's operations. For the past month, I know the capabilities of every aircraft, the qualifications of every pilot, the specifications of every weapons system. I've analyzed the enemy threat systems we're facing, and I know how to defeat them. I can lead this mission and bring our people home safely. The command center erupted into sudden activity as Morrison made his decision. Get Commander Vasquez to the equipment room immediately. I want her suited up and ready for briefing in 15 minutes. Contact the Flight Operations Center and tell them we have a qualified mission commander. Elena felt a surge of adrenaline as personnel began moving around her with purposeful urgency. After weeks of watching from the sidelines, she was finally being given the opportunity she had trained her entire career for. The F-35 Lightning II was no longer just an aircraft she observed from a distance, but a weapon system she would soon be controlling in combat. As Elena hurried toward the equipment room, she passed several of the pilots she had worked with during her time in logistics. Their expressions ranged from shock to admiration to something that might have been embarrassment. Captain Rodriguez was among them, his face showing a complex mixture of emotions as he watched her transformation from supply coordinator to mission commander. The equipment room was a flurry of activity as technicians helped Elena into her flight suit and survival gear. The familiar weight of the equipment felt good after weeks of civilian clothes and logistics uniforms. As they fitted her helmet and checked her oxygen connections, Elena felt herself settling into the mental state she had cultivated during hundreds of previous missions. Elena's mind was already shifting into mission planning mode as she reviewed the tactical situation and considered her options. The enemy forces were well positioned and dangerous, but they were not invincible. The F-35's stealth capabilities and advanced sensors would give her significant advantages if she used them correctly. More importantly, her understanding of the aircraft systems and her experience in similar tactical situations provided her with insights that could mean the difference between success and failure. The mission briefing took place in the main operations center, with Elena standing at the front of the room, addressing the 3 junior pilots who would be flying with her. She could see the mixture of nervousness and determination in their faces, as they realized they would be following someone they had barely noticed during their time at the base. "The tactical situation is complex but manageable," Elena began, her voice calm and authoritative. "The enemy has established a layered defense around the target area, but their systems have vulnerabilities we can exploit. Our primary objectives are to suppress the surface-to-air missile sites, provide air cover for the extraction operation, and neutralize any enemy fighters that attempt to interfere." Elena spent the next 20 minutes outlining the mission plan in detail, explaining attack routes, timing sequences, and contingency procedures. She could see the junior pilots' confidence building as they realized they were being led by someone who truly understood both the aircraft and the tactical situation. Lieutenant Sarah Brooks, the most experienced of the 3 junior pilots, raised her hand with a question. "Commander, the intelligence reports indicate the presence of enemy stealth fighters. How do we handle that threat?" Elena smiled, recognizing the intelligent concern behind the question. "The F-35's sensor fusion capabilities give us a significant advantage in detecting and engaging stealth aircraft. We'll be using a tactical formation that maximizes our collective sensor coverage while maintaining our own stealth characteristics. The key is patience and discipline we let them come to us rather than rushing into an engagement." As the briefing concluded and the pilots dispersed to complete their pre-flight preparations, Elena felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to find Colonel Morrison standing behind her, his expression serious but respectful. "Commander, I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "I made assumptions about your capabilities based on incomplete information. That was my failure as a commander, and I'm sorry." Elena met his gaze steadily. "Sir, the only thing that matters now is completing this mission successfully. We can address administrative issues when I return." Morrison nodded, his expression showing both relief and determination. "Bring them home safely, Commander. That task force is counting on us." Elena walked toward the flight line with purposeful strides, her mind already focused on the complex mission ahead. The F-35 Lightning II that awaited her was aircraft number 762, one of the newest in the squadron's inventory and equipped with the latest software updates and weapon systems. Ground crews were completing their final checks as she approached, their movements efficient and professional. As Elena conducted her pre-flight inspection, she felt the familiar ritual calming her mind and sharpening her focus. Every surface, every connection, every system was examined with the thoroughness that had been drilled into her during years of training. The aircraft was in perfect condition, ready to perform the demanding mission that lay ahead. Elena climbed into the cockpit, with movements that were automatic after hundreds of similar moments. The F-35's displays came to life as she activated the systems, the advanced avionics presenting her with a comprehensive picture of the aircraft's status and capabilities. Everything was green, everything was ready. As the canopy closed above her and the engine began its startup sequence, Elena felt a profound sense of rightness. This was where she belonged, what she had trained for, what she was meant to do. The weeks of logistics work and administrative duties fell away as she prepared to do what she did best: fly the most advanced fighter aircraft in the world in defense of her country and her fellow service members. The radio crackled to life, with clearance for takeoff, and Elena advanced the throttle as she began her taxi to the runway. Behind her, 3 other F-35s followed in formation, their pilots trusting her leadership and expertise to guide them through the dangerous mission. Ahead, Elena aligned her aircraft with the runway centerline and felt the familiar surge of power as the V-35's engine reached full thrust. The Lightning II accelerated smoothly down the runway, its aerodynamic design cutting through the air with practiced efficiency. At rotation speed, Elena pulled back gently on the stick and felt the aircraft lift off into the pre-dawn darkness. As Thunderbolt Air Base fell away beneath her, Elena turned toward the distant coordinates where Joint Task Force Viper was fighting for survival. The mission ahead would test every skill she had developed, every lesson she had learned, every capability the F-35 Lightning II possessed. But Elena was ready for the challenge, finally able to prove that she belonged in the cockpit of the world's most advanced fighter aircraft. The transformation was complete. Elena Vasquez was no longer a logistics coordinator who happened to understand aviation. She was what she had always been, a combat pilot, ready to use her skills and her aircraft to make a difference when it mattered most. The crisis had revealed the truth that had been hidden for too long, and now that truth would be tested in the most demanding environment of all actual combat against a determined and capable enemy. As the four F-35s climbed toward their cruising altitude and turned toward the South China Sea, Elena felt a sense of completeness that had been missing for weeks. This was her element, her calling, her purpose. Everything that had happened before this moment had been preparation for what was to come, and Elena was determined to prove that the faith placed in her was justified. The radio chatter from the task force was growing more urgent as enemy forces continued to close in. Elena listened to the communications with growing determination, knowing that the lives of her fellow service members depended on her ability to lead this mission successfully. The F-35 Lightning II was responding perfectly to her commands, its systems functioning flawlessly as she prepared to enter one of the most challenging tactical situations of her career. Elena Vasquez was finally flying where she belonged, doing what she was meant to do, proving that sometimes the most unlikely person in the room is exactly the person you need when everything is on the line. Elena's F-35 streaked through the darkness at Mach 1.4, its stealth profile invisible to enemy radar as she led her formation toward the South China Sea. The tactical display showed enemy positions, crystallizing around Joint Task Force Viper like a closing fist. She had 37 minutes to break through layered defenses that had taken the enemy hours to establish. Viper lead, this is Phoenix 1. Elena transmitted on the secure frequency. 4 F-35s inbound your position. Give me a tactical update. The response came immediately, stressed but professional. Phoenix 1. We're taking heavy fire from 3 destroyer-class vessels and shore-based SAM sites. Enemy fighters are vectoring in from the northeast. We need immediate suppression of those surface threats. Elena studied her sensor displays, the F-35's advanced systems painting a detailed picture of the battle space. The enemy had positioned their forces cleverly, using the terrain and their own electronic warfare capabilities to create overlapping kill zones. But Elena could see the gaps, the precise timing windows where their coordination faltered. Phoenix Flight, implement attack pattern Delta, she commanded. Brooks, you're with me on the northern approach. Martinez and Collins, take the southern vector. We hit them simultaneously in 90 seconds. Elena dropped her Lightning to wave top level, using the ocean's surface to mask her approach from enemy radar. The F-35's stealth characteristics were most effective at these angles, making her nearly invisible until the moment of weapons release. Behind her, Lieutenant Brooks matched her maneuvers with growing confidence. The first surface-to-air missile site appeared on Elena's targeting display, its radar dome rotating steadily as it searched for threats. Elena armed her aircraft's precision-guided munitions and waited for the perfect moment. The enemy radar beam swept past her position without detecting the incoming threat. Weapons away, Elena announced as two missiles streaked from her aircraft toward the SAM site. The explosions bloomed orange against the pre-dawn sky as the enemy position was eliminated with surgical precision. The battle developed rapidly as all four F-35s engaged their targets simultaneously. Elena coordinated the attack with fluid precision, her tactical awareness allowing her to direct her pilots while engaging her own objectives. The enemy defenses began to crumble under the coordinated assault, their carefully planned positions falling one by one. Phoenix 1, we have bandits inbound, Brooks warned as enemy fighters appeared on the sensor displays. Elena had been expecting this moment. The enemy stealth fighters were capable opponents, but they lacked the sensor fusion advantages of the F-35. Maintain formation discipline, she ordered. Let them come to us. The air-to-air engagement was brief but decisive. Elena's superior situational awareness allowed her to position her formation advantageously, using the F-35's capabilities to detect and engage the enemy aircraft before they could effectively respond. Within minutes, 3 enemy fighters had been neutralized with no losses to the American formation. Viper lead, your extraction route is clear, Elena transmitted as the last surface threat was eliminated. Phoenix Flight will provide overwatch until you're safely away. The task force began its withdrawal under the protective umbrella of Elena's F-35s. The precision of the operation, the seamless coordination between air and naval forces, and the complete neutralization of enemy threats had been executed flawlessly. Elena felt a deep satisfaction as she watched the extraction proceed without interference. 40 minutes later, Elena touched down at Thunderbolt Air Base as the sun began to rise over the Nevada desert. Ground crews rushed to service the aircraft as she shut down the engines, but Elena sat in the cockpit for a moment longer, processing what had just occurred. When she finally climbed down from the F-35, Elena found Colonel Morrison waiting on the tarmac with most of the base's senior staff. The colonel's expression was difficult to read, but Elena could see respect where there had once been confusion. "Outstanding work, Commander," Morrison said, extending his hand. "Joint Task Force Viper reports mission accomplished with 0 casualties. You and your pilots performed flawlessly under extremely challenging conditions." Elena accepted the handshake, noting the firm grip and direct eye contact. "Thank you, sir. The aircraft performed perfectly, and my wingmen executed their assignments with precision." Lieutenant Colonel Chun stepped forward, her own expression showing unmistakable admiration. "Commander, I need to ask directly, why didn't you inform us of your qualifications when you first arrived?" Elena considered her response carefully. "Ma'am, I believe that earning respect through demonstrated competence would be more valuable than demanding it based on credentials. I wanted to understand this organization thoroughly before revealing my full capabilities." Captain Rodriguez emerged from the small crowd of pilots who had gathered to witness the returning formation. His expression was complex, showing embarrassment, mixed with genuine respect. "Commander, I owe you an apology." "We all do. We made assumptions about your role here that were completely wrong." Elena met his gaze steadily. "Captain, you treated me professionally and fairly given the information you had. That's all anyone can expect." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a staff car carrying a general officer whom Elena recognized as the commander of the entire F-35 program. The appearance of such a senior official at this early hour indicated the significance of the night's events. General Patricia Hayes climbed out of the vehicle with the bearing of someone accustomed to command. Elena came to attention as the general approached, but Hayes waved her to a more relaxed posture. "Commander Vasquez, I've been monitoring the Pavaz situation since the crisis began," Hayes said. "The performance of your formation tonight was exceptional by any standard. You demonstrated exactly the kind of tactical innovation and leadership we need in the F-35 program. Elena felt a mix of pride and anticipation as she recognized that this conversation would likely determine her future assignment. Thank you, General. The F-35 is a remarkable platform when operated by properly trained personnel. Hayes nodded, her expression thoughtful. That's precisely why I'm here. The incident tonight has highlighted some significant issues with our personnel. Management systems. We clearly have qualified pilots being misassigned due to administrative errors. The General turned to address Colonel Morrison directly. Colonel, I'm reassigning Commander Vasquez to flight operations effective immediately. Furthermore, I want her to develop a comprehensive review of our pilot assignment procedures to prevent similar situations in the future. Elena felt a surge of satisfaction as her new assignment was formalized. After weeks of proving herself in logistics, she was finally being recognized for her true capabilities and given the opportunity to contribute as a pilot. There's more, General Hayes continued. Based on tonight's performance, I'm recommending Commander Vasquez for promotion to full commander and assignment as deputy squadron leader. We need officers who can bridge the gap between technical expertise and operational leadership. The announcement sent a visible ripple through the assembled personnel. Elena could see the mixture of surprise and acceptance on the faces around her as they processed the dramatic change in her status and role. Lieutenant Brooks approached Elena with a broad smile. Commander, I just wanted to say that flying with you tonight was an honor. Your tactical leadership was incredible. Similar comments came from the other pilots who had participated in the mission. And Elena realized that the crisis had accomplished more than just proving her capabilities. It had demonstrated to the entire squadron that competence and leadership could come from unexpected sources. As the immediate debriefing concluded and personnel began to disperse, Elena found herself walking back toward the squadron building with a group that now included her as a full member rather than an outside observer. The transformation was complete and irreversible. Major Williams from Supply Operations approached as Elena was signing out of her flight gear. Commander, I have to admit that working with you these past weeks has been extraordinary. Your understanding of both logistics and operations is unique, and I hope we can continue to coordinate closely. Elena smiled at the woman who had been her supervisor and was now her colleague. Major, the work we did together taught me valuable lessons about the complexity of supporting advanced aircraft operations. That knowledge will make me a better pilot and leader. Later that morning, Elena stood in Colonel Morrison's office receiving her new assignment papers and quarters allocation. The colonel's demeanor had shifted completely from their first meeting, reflecting a new understanding of who she was and what she could contribute. Commander, I want you to know that this experience has been educational for all of us, Morrison said. We pride ourselves on recognizing talent and potential, but we clearly missed something significant in your case. Elena accepted the paperwork with steady hands. Sir, sometimes the most valuable lessons come from unexpected situations. I learned a great deal about this organization during my time in logistics, knowledge that will make me more effective in my new role. The afternoon brought Elena's first official flight operations briefing as a squadron pilot rather than a logistics observer. She sat in the front row of the briefing room, her new squadron patch visible on her flight suit, participating in discussions as an equal rather than watching from the sidelines. The dynamic in the room had shifted noticeably. Pilots who had barely acknowledged her presence now sought her opinions on tactical matters and aircraft systems. The invisible barriers that had separated her from the squadron's core mission had been swept away by the events of the previous night. Lieutenant Park approached Elena after the briefing with a request that would have been unthinkable just days earlier. Commander, I was wondering if you might have time to review some of the sensor fusion procedures I've been struggling with. After seeing how you managed the tactical picture last night, I'd really value your insights. Elena agreed immediately. recognizing the opportunity to mentor a younger pilot and contribute to the squadron's overall effectiveness. The conversation she had longed to have, the knowledge she had wanted to share, were now welcome and actively sought. Over the following days, Elena settled into her new role with the same methodical approach she had brought to logistics. She studied the squadron's procedures, identified areas for improvement, and began implementing changes that enhanced both safety and effectiveness. Her unique perspective, combining extensive F-35 experience with recent exposure to the support systems that kept the aircraft operational, allowed her to see connections that others missed. Training procedures were refined, maintenance coordination was improved, and tactical doctrine was updated based on lessons learned during the crisis. Colonel Morrison called Elena into his office 1 week after the mission to discuss her initial observations and recommendations. The report she presented was comprehensive and insightful, addressing everything from pilot training progression to supply chain optimization. "This is exceptional work, Commander," Morrison said after reviewing her analysis. "You've identified improvements that will benefit the entire program, not just our squadron." Elena felt a deep satisfaction in knowing that her contributions were making a real difference. "Sir, the opportunity to serve in multiple roles here has given me a unique perspective on how all the pieces fit together. I'm grateful for the chance to put that knowledge to use." The transformation at Thunderbolt Air Base extended beyond Elena's personal assignment. The events of the crisis had prompted a broader review of personnel management practices and assumptions about capability assessment. New procedures were implemented to ensure that qualified personnel were properly identified and utilized regardless of their current assignments. General Hayes returned to the base several weeks later to review the changes and their implementation. She met privately with Elena to discuss the broader implications of the situation and the lessons learned. "Commander, your experience here has highlighted some important issues with how we manage talent in the military," Hayes said. "We're implementing changes at the program level to ensure that qualified personnel are properly utilized from the moment they arrive at their assignments." Elena listened thoughtfully, recognizing the significance of the systemic changes being discussed. "General, I think the key is creating environments where people feel comfortable revealing their full capabilities, where competence is recognized and valued regardless of preconceptions." Hayes nodded approvingly. "Exactly, and that requires leadership that's willing to look beyond superficial assumptions and recognize that excellence can come from unexpected sources." As Elena's first month as a squadron pilot concluded, she reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought her to this point. The patient endurance, the quiet competence, and the willingness to prove herself in whatever role was assigned had ultimately led to the opportunity she had sought. The F-35 Lightning II was no longer just an aircraft she admired from a distance, but a tool she used daily to contribute to the nation's defense. Her fellow pilots now sought her expertise and valued her leadership, recognizing her as an integral part of the squadron's mission. Elena understood that her story was not unique, that there were likely other qualified personnel throughout the military who were underutilized due to administrative errors or false assumptions. The changes being implemented at Thunderbolt Air Base and throughout the F-35 program would help ensure that their talents were properly recognized and employed. Standing on the flight line as another group of F-35s prepared for launch, Elena felt a profound sense of accomplishment and purpose. She had achieved her goal of flying the world's most advanced fighter aircraft, but more importantly, she had helped create an environment where others like her would have better opportunities to demonstrate their capabilities. The legacy of her time at Thunderbolt Air Base would extend far beyond her personal success. The lessons learned, the procedures implemented, and the attitudes changed would benefit future generations of military personnel who deserve to be judged on their competence rather than their circumstances. Elena Vasquez had proven that sometimes the person everyone overlooks is exactly the person you need when everything is on the line. Her story would serve as a reminder that excellence can emerge from the most unexpected places, and that true leadership means recognizing and nurturing that excellence wherever it appears. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.